Hey guys, this is Kyle from Genie. Just want to give a quick shout out to anyone who checked out our latest Fall Guys cover. It's performing way better than we thought it would. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to take you into the mix and show you how we kind of got that blend of really, really heavy metal with electronic. Something that we really wanted to do was keep the electronic feel of the original track, but add like this just really huge element to it. So I'm going to take you into the mix and show you a little bit of what we did. I think we did some pretty unique stuff in there. I'll see you in Reaper. Okay, so the first section of this song is this little tiny intro that I added way after the fact in my synth section. I believe this was a part that happened later in the song, and usually I don't like to start these songs with an abrupt hit or anything, so I ended up landing on this printed synth here. Basically all that is a synth that was printed, and then I run it into a snap heap, which this plugin is absolutely amazing. It's great for automation stuff, so you can just load a ton of crap in it and automate it on and off to completely change your sounds without having to make a new track, and it's super easy to automate all of the different elements of this plugin. So if you have the Slate bundle, I highly recommend you check out Snap Heap. It's like, it's kind of a game changer for me as far as just having a completely different sound all in one plugin, so when you bypass that plugin, the sound returns completely to normal. Super convenient. I have a chorus on it and a delay and some reverser stuff. In all honesty, I'm just kind of putting things on at random at this point, just trying to create something unique. This plugin I just fell in love with recently, which is the Kilohertz Dynamics plugin. It pretty much levels the signal, so this is the tail, and you can pretty much limit that super, super hard, so the tail is almost as loud as the individual notes. I use that on a lot of stuff in this mix. And then after that, just a small EQ to get rid of some of that harsh stuff. And the sweep, that sweeping EQ is coming from, on my synth group track, I have Always, a Fab Filter EQ, Valhalla Room, and another Fab Filter EQ. These are all mapped to automation lanes, so I have the sweep mapped to this automation lane right here. The reason why I do that on the group is if I ever want to sweep all the synths together to make some kind of a dramatic drop-off, I have the ability to do that here, right on the group. So I have a Valhalla Room, I have the mix in the automation lanes, I have the Fab Filter EQ sweep, and I also have a bypass for that sweep Fab Filter plugin altogether. My first Fab Filter plugin, which is what all the synths go through, I'm just getting rid of a ton of low end so nothing creeps in. I'm also cleaning a ton of low end out of the mid channel only. That kind of spreads the synths a little wider because there's not much going on in the middle as far as low end stuff goes, and that's all cleaned up in the master EQ anyway. That's a really, really nice trick to spread your synths a little wider than they should be. So that sounds like this with all the synths and all the automation lanes. Pretty typical stuff there. When I was listening back to this song after I completed it, I thought a lot of these earlier verse parts are pretty quiet. So what I did was I automated a pre-effects volume boost up just a hair. On the intro, it's down. As soon as these drums pop in, I automate it up so the drums are hitting the compressor a little harder than they would towards the end of the song. And I think I kept that pretty much uniform for this whole first section of the song here. Yep. So what I'm doing is I felt like this part was a little quiet, so I'm boosting the volume before it hits any of these master fader plugins, just so it can give it a little more edge, because it was a little dull before after coming into the louder parts of the song. Coming out of the intro, we have this noise swell, which I use throughout the song. Right after that little intro sweep thing, we also have a fill. The drums is something I keep evolving every time I do a mix. I use Steven Slate drums. I use a Reaper plugin at the beginning, which automates humanization into the MIDI, so it sounds a little bit nicer than it does with just Steven's humanization built-in stuff itself. For the drums, I have them in their own group. I have a parallel compression bus, I have a snare reverb, and a overall drum reverb. Those all are routed into this one drum group. That way, I can have control over the overall level of the drums, which I do a ton in this mix, which is the reverbs and the parallel compressions all as one fader. And I automate that a ton throughout this entire mix and every mix that I do. Let me just give a quick listen to the drums. Drums are pretty standard. The kick, I just do a ton of scooping. I find that Steven's kicks have way too much low end than I would ever need, so I usually end up taking a lot of that out. A lot of that gets put back when it comes to the pseudo mastering phase with the multiband compression and the bass guitar, but it all really depends on how much low end the bass has and how much low end I want my kick to have versus the bass. So for this one, I must have felt that it had way too much low end and not enough highs, so I tucked that down pretty low. This is running to the parallel compression channel as well, right outside of this main drum group. Snare, same thing. Couple of cuts here and there. Steven's snares sound pretty good, so I don't usually have to do a lot. This is a layered snare drum, so there's two samples on top of each other. So this is a snare 11 mixed with a snare 5. So that sound is coming from both of those blended together. Rack tom, just typical EQ moves, scooping some mids. The rack tom gets sent to the drum verb and the parallel compression. Same thing with the floor. And that's pretty much my drum sound. A lot of my drum sound comes from this parallel compression bus, which is totally destroyed. Basically, that is a very harshly parallel compressed drum. And then I ran it through Snap Heap, put a ton of color on it, and really wanted to crush it so it's super gritty and it's super cutty. This is mixed so low that you're not really going to hear it, but when it's gone, you lose a lot of that cut. I usually tend to take these cymbals out of the room mic from Slade as well, because I feel like the room is best suited for a huge snare ambience. Okay, so for this first part of the song, right coming out of the intro, we have that drum fill. And then it goes to a part which is the actual intro. It's got this noise swell. It has this digi kit, which runs through a lot of the song. That just kind of mimics the breakbeat kind of style of kit that was in the original game. Sounds like this. And what that does is it adds a lot of emphasis to the real kit snare. It really reinforces that. It also, since a lot of this song I'm playing the hi-hat in the left speaker, it adds a little more information to the right when they kind of play off each other. Sounds really cool. Bass is in this section too, which sounds like this. For the bass, I have limiter running into parallax, which is pretty standard. The limiter before parallax is something I just started doing. It shaves off the harshness of the DI bass. Something I just started doing recently too, I'm limiting the crap out of this bass too. I use a multipass, which is another kilohertz plugin. It's amazing. It's pretty much a multiband compressor, but in each of the slots you can add any effect you want. So for this bass tone, I'm limiting a ton of the low end, limiting a ton of the bass's bite, and then I'm EQing a little bit out of that top end just because when I was doing the mix it was a little bit harsh. From there I run it into another limiter, but this bass is just sitting where it needs to be and it moves when I tell it to move. That's what all this limiting is doing. We have a lead guitar line. Which is just a nollie. It's from the archetype nollie tone. I use the Cool Trick for Reaper on this line here. So if you guys want to know what the Cool Trick for Reaper is, you can go check out my other video where I talk about the Cool Trick for Reaper. Let me explain it. Basically what I have is... Cool thing about Reaper, which is a cool trick for Reaper, is you can run any of these items, can have up to I think 64 channels in the item. So I'm taking advantage of that by in my channels 1-2, which is right here. This is my distorted guitar. Channel 3-4 is my DI guitar printed in the same track. One of the cool things about that is I can edit according to the DI, which has way more transient information than an amp would. So it makes editing a lot easier. And also if I want to go back and change the tone at any time, I'm not married to this amp sound because all I have to do is switch to the DI, which is all in the same track, and then I can run that through any kind of reamp I want to do. We have rhythm guitars. I did not use the Cool Trick for Reaper for these tones because after we recorded with way too much gain, so I had to go back and fix that. For these guitars, I'm running an EQ before the amp. Jeff's 7-string is super bassy, so I cut a lot of that out before it even hits the amp. It makes the distortion a little smoother. I chopped out some upper mids, which is super harsh for his guitars, and then boosted a lot of highs. I did that for both, and both of those are running through multiband compression, which is just doing that old Andy Sneap trick that everyone does. Just the only purpose of this is to tame the low end of the palm mute so they sound even compared to the rest of the guitar. I'm running it through a rhythm group, which is limiting the low end again because I don't want it to get too out of control. I have a EQ, just scooping a little of those muddy frequencies out. And then that's all running through Soothe. And this is one of the best plugins you'll ever invest in. All it does is it's pretty much like a ton of little multi-band compressions in the upper frequencies, or anywhere actually. If you want to just try and EQ that high-end crap out, a lot of times you'll end up completely killing the air of the guitar sound. So Soothe is really great for fighting that. We have a synth lead, which is just mimicking the lead guitar. One thing we did here was we have this little harmony that comes in with the lead. And that's something that happens in the song. Those two leads kind of intertwine each other. So whenever this lead hits, I wanted to pan this main lead out of the center. The reason you do that is you clear a little room up in the center and you give each part kind of their own space to work with. Let's listen to that intro. In the original song, there's this little duck riser, so I found this really cool setting in Analog Lab, which is the only synth package you'll ever need to buy. It's from an old Jupiter. Sounds like this. A little bit of reverb going on with Snap Heap. I'm limiting the sound as I do. Every synth I always limit because synths are all over the spectrum in terms of frequencies. And then I'm just doing this really, really tiny rise with kilohertz pitch shifter, automated, just to give it a little more tension going into the first verse. So coming into the first verse, we have this reverse cymbal, which is pretty standard for me, which is a reverse cymbal with reverb. I also have another noise swell. In the original song, there was this little kind of like up-down thing going on, so I just emulated that with Super Audio Cart, which is just this really, really cool sounding drop-off thing. I mean, you can't really hear it in the mix, but it makes a huge difference when going into the next part. Verse 1. So verse 1, we have Digikit again. Same as the intro. We have bass playing a really cool line. And the bass is just sounding super, super, super tight because of all that limiting that we did. We have a left and right guitar lead. Super, super choppy, just like the original song. I wanted to keep this part tight because I knew as the song went on, we were gonna kind of open these parts up a lot. So I have this pan completely right, and then the main lead I took out of the center and panned it a little bit to the left to give more room for everything else. We have some rhythm guitars. The rhythm guitars are very, very low in this mix up until the end. I just want them there to fill out the stereo spectrum. The synths are really, really carrying this part. The pad hits are playing the same riff as the lead. With a little bit of a flam there so you can distinguish between the notes. Same thing with this xylophone. It's a little bit flammed and it's panned to the hard right. And we have a pad running underneath the whole song. One thing the pad is really, really, really good at is adding cohesion to parts that are gapped out like these ones are. Everything is super, super staccato, and the pad kind of holds it all together. So all together, the first verse sounds like this. right, so right at the end of this verse is a really, really cool lead that plays. Sounds cool on guitar, and we also do the same exact thing on synth. And that's how you get that really, really thick, kind of like out of the speaker sound, is by layering the same leads like that. All right, so verse 2. Verse 2 is mainly a bass part, so I'm just playing this really, really simple snare roll. But first, we have another noise swell going into it. Noise swell, which has a fatterator on it, just spreading it left and right. A noise swell is really, really great for jumping into a new part and adding this like really huge air that comes in. I think they sit a little better than reverse cymbals. Reverse cymbals sound a little too, I don't want to say artificial, because a noise swell is super artificial, but just kind of gives you like an elevation going into the next part. Drums are just doing this really typical flammy snare roll thing. The main thing here is the bass. So the bass is playing this little riff. Super choppy, super chopped up, and that is also being layered with this synth. For this part, I pan the bass a little bit to the left, pan the synth a little bit to the right to get a little space between them, because when I had them sitting on top of each other, you just couldn't tell what the hell was going on. So I split those up just a hair. This little verse B section, the guitars come in playing the same pattern of riff as the bass, just keeps scaling itself up. It's a really cool orchestrated part from the original song. I think what really brings this part together is the rhythm guitars. They're kind of chugging along with the riff with their bass notes. But then we wanted to have a part at the end that kind of was just super heavy and out of control. So I wrote this little drummy fill thing that accented the lead, but then we kind of go into like this sustained chug part that really ties the part together with the rhythms. Pretty cool, sounds super heavy. And I cut the synth out there because it should be just a guitar part. This is the vocal part. So we asked Lacey Johnson to do vocals for us, and she sent me these sort of pre-mixed vocals back, and they sounded amazing. Let me play those for you really quick. Okay, so I mixed all these vocals in a group. She gave them to me, and they sounded pretty good. I just chopped a ton of high off because I wanted them to kind of sit back. I didn't want them to sound too fizzy. I limited them, added Valhalla Room, which I always do. Snap Heap, what did I do with Snap Heap? Oh, that's for the shifting. Okay. Snap Heap, I have a pitch shift automation that happens right at the end of this riff. And then I have Soothe over the whole thing, and that's just keeping that upper mids in check. Everything kind of drops out for that part except for the vocals and drums. A guitar squeal comes in really, really quick, and this is another reason why I tend to put Valhalla Room on all of my group tracks, because if I want to automate in a reverb, I usually have the mix automation ready to go, so I use it here, perfect example. Just to give those pinch harmonics a little more size. It's easier just to do that on the whole group than it is to have it on these individual tracks, plus you end up using less Valhalla Rooms in the long run. And then the duck track comes back, the quack track, that starts rising in pitch just like it did throughout the intro. So the end of this, I wanted it to be a super dramatic drop off, so I automated pitch on Lacey's vocals, so it sounds almost like a tape stop in a way. So that's cool. I also added some reverb to that with automation, and I chopped everything out. I think what makes the next part sound so huge is this. I have an impact come in. So right after that dramatic pause, the impact hits. What else do I got? Digikit comes back in, bass comes back in, and then these huge 7 strings just blast. We initially tracked it a lot earlier, but I didn't like the position that it came into, and this first note, we bent into it, so I couldn't really use it. So I just chopped the beginning off. I have it come in halfway through the note, but it sounds great because the attack isn't huge, but the part just sounds gigantic. So this part, we have the drums, guitar, and bass playing the lines from the song. I have that pan to the left, and I believe I have the synth line pan to the right. Yep, so the synth is doing the same thing as a guitar, just layering it. I always tend to layer lead guitars with synths. I think it sounds awesome. What really makes this part is this slow, out-of-tune line that kind of creeps up throughout the whole thing. So what I did too for this lead is I have an instance of Faderator on that I bypass off everywhere else in the song except for this part. It's giving it a ton of stereo and just adding a ton of drive to the lead and fuzz too. So with the Faderator, it sounds like this. And without the Faderator. With. Just gives it way more high end, spreads it out a ton, and it kind of like almost wraps the section in itself. This little line that is rising gives this part all the tension that it has. It's such an awesome layer to put in by the original composers. What else we got? So we go into this really djenty part here, which is kind of cool, coming right out of this first, like the second half. So I have Jeff play the same lead, but really rocky. So here's the old lead going into the rocky version. Sounds super cool with these djenty guitars playing in kind of like a polymeter way. It's like Baby's first polymeter, but it works really well with the part. You don't even really hear it, but you can tell the part is like adds a little bit of craziness to the part. And right at the end of the riff, there was this really wacky synthy part in the song, and I didn't want to copy it exactly, whatever. So I just told Jeff to do some tricks, and Jeff always knows a bunch of tricks. So he did this little Dillinger kind of a thing, and then he harmonized it. Just sounds like a shit ton of computers. So then that goes into the biggest part of the song. The whole song kind of has like this choppy split melody, and eventually goes into this really epic melodic part. And I think the fact that the whole song is like pieced out, and then there's this one section kind of at the end of the song that comes melodic, makes the arrangement pop so good. We have a reverse cymbal going into an impact again. So that sound makes the part pop even more. We have bass. We have 3 guitars all playing the leads. We have 3-part harmony going on at this part. We have rhythm guitars. We have 2 synth lines playing the same thing as the lead guitars. All of these layers make the part sound gigantic. Then we have huge chords going on underneath it. You're going to be like, wow, that is a really shitty sounding synth. But in the mix, it works really well. Let me play the whole part. So coming out of this part, I also wanted to kind of have like a filtery die, just like it does in the original song. On the guitar group, I have a filter track, which is doing this little sweep. All the guitars are running through this group, so they all sweep. Sounds really cool with the drum fill. I'm doing the exact same thing in the synth group. Happens a little earlier than guitar, makes it a little more dramatic. And for the drums, which is kind of what carries us into the next part, I have this little synth roll that comes in before the actual snare drum fill, and I think that adds a ton to the impact of the drums. So let me play both of those soloed. So the digi-kit is sweeping from one speaker to the next. That kind of precursors the drum fill. So coming into this final section, which is orchestrated super well. Every time I was mixing it, I was like flipping out because it sounded so cool. Noise swell hits right at the front, so that just accents that first cymbal hit. We got shaker and tambourine on the right speaker. We have the digi-kit, which is automated to the left speaker, so it kind of gives separation between the shaker and the digital kit. It just makes the drums sound super wide, so let me play all of the percussion parts together. Just adds a ton of width to the percussion. The bass is just playing straight driving notes. Then we have lead guitar. We have 3-part harmony for the lead. The harmony layers aren't really heard, but they make the guitar feel super wide. Rhythm's just playing the same thing as the bass. And then we have a ton of synth. This is the main synth line that kind of gives this part its feel. It's the line from the intro of the song, but it's played over different root notes. It's like one of those old cinema tricks or movie soundtrack tricks where you have a lead and it's playing over different root notes than what the lead was designed to be played over type of thing, over explaining it. Here's that lead. So we have that lead playing over these root notes. Me and my friend Nick used to call those Corey riffs because there was a show called Making the Band where this dude Corey would always play those riffs. So in my opinion, that's called a Corey riff. If you've ever seen Making the Band, I don't know if I'm dating myself. The show was awesome. We have the regular synth lead. Just playing the same riff as a guitar, but a harmony comes through halfway and we're just doing the panning. So the harmony gets out of the way of the main lead. Then we have this really shitting sounding pad again. But it's so grimy that in the mix, it makes everything sound great. So what happens at this next part, in the original song, the vocals come in here. I didn't want to just be upbeat the whole time, so I made a downbeaty riff that matched the rhythm of the vocals to kind of accent them a little more. So the rhythm guitars are chugging right along with the vocals. And that's just playing typical heavy metal kind of stuff. What I did with the vocals here is I boosted them a ton. I took the lead guitars, the main lead, panned it hard right, panned the other harmony hard left, and I took both of their levels down a little bit because I wanted the vocals to have a spot. I also took the third part of this harmony out because we didn't need it because the vocals were taking up so much room. I also took a lot of the synth layers that were accenting the guitars out because I wanted to add some contrast between this part and the part before it. But one of the really cool things that you can barely hear in the song is I turned this lead for this next downbeat part, I turned it into this. And I did that all with one bypass automation for Snap Heap. So on Snap Heap, I have a chorus. I have the trance gate, which is giving it the pumping. I have a ton of reverb. I have an EQ, the Fatterator, which is adding a ton of grit. And then I have another EQ, just taking a little of the highs that Fatterator put on. In the mix, it's very, very buried, but it adds a ton of movement to the part. Let me play the whole part. Just gives that downbeat part way more movement than it would have if I just kept that same riff going for all of these bars. So Snap Heap is so good for stuff like that. Just taking a sound like this. Same sound, same synth, same plugins, except Snap Heap with a ton of shit put into it. Can all be controlled with one automation thing. So good. So halfway through, we go into a even deeper downbeat. The same riff plays, the lead synth comes back in, the chords come back in, and at this point, I'm just kind of taking things out and bringing things in. I already have all the layers in, and I just want to create contrast between the parts. So the way you do that is you take out more guitars and you add synths in their place. It kind of just gives everything a really awesome change. And I'm adding all these impacts between the parts too. And those are just making the parts sound like they're brand new parts. Kind of gives everything a different feel doing it this way instead of having the same thing playing all the time. When you keep swapping instruments out like this, playing the same things, it almost takes you on a journey, I guess. I don't want to sound corny. Your brain keeps hearing these new things that are still similar, and it's like, wow, this mix is evolving in a cool way, and it keeps you way more interested than it does if you're just playing the same thing over and over again. The end of the song. Just holding out a root note, bringing that synth back in from the beginning part, and then all just playing along with the main riff at the end. The drums accent it, everything accents it, except the vocals are kind of in and out of that riff. Makes them sit really well. So yeah, that was Fall Guys, the mix. If you guys could get anything out of this, let me know in the comments down below. Also, if you want me to do more of these mixing breakdowns for any of our other tracks, let me know about that too. If you want me to go into something in more detail, I can also do that. Make sure you check out my other video. It's probably going to be like here maybe, about the cool trick for Reaper that involves guitar amp sims and splitting between channels 1, 2, 3, and 4, flipping back and forth between the two. That saves you a ton of processing power, so you probably want to check that one out. Also, make sure you check out the whole Fall Guys video that we shot right about here, where you can hear the song in its entirety, and it also should be up on Spotify right now too. Thanks guys, and I'll see you on the next one.